My grandfather was a park service ranger, and he would always tell me these stories. Apparently, on the plot of land that he owned, there was some kind of weird figure that would appear every so often. Now, you couldn't ask him exactly what it was and get necessarily a clear answer, because it would change from time to time. He basically wasn't sure exactly what it was, and each time he would describe it different, usually using the different emotions of which he felt while spotting it. Exactly the same thing would happen with my grandma. Sometimes it was like this thing was angry, sometimes it was like it was hurting, sometimes it was like it was lonely, and sometimes it was like it was lost. But one thing was sure, they always reported seeing it, and it actually gone back to their parents and grandparents. Now apparently there was some kind of ancient burial site upon this land, and I didn't know about it until I got older. But allegedly, there have been multiple sightings of something tall, skeletal in appearance, which apparently would roam the land randomly. The first time of which it was sighted was near the small river and the lake that's on the back of their property. Apparently, it was seen virtually hovering across the water by my great-grandpa. Apparently he was hunting one day and stopped for a while to rest by it when he saw this thing. Apparently it scared him so much that he actually tried to fire shots at it. He said either he had the worst aim in the world that day, or that thing was some kind of spirit and the shots were going through it. He didn't know. He was so scared that he actually left his gun there. It was out of ammo by that point, but he wanted to get away as quick as possible and not necessarily carry any dead weight whatsoever. The next time it was spotted was by his wife a few years later. Apparently she was out trying to pick wild berries on their property one day when she could see a skeletal head staring at her from behind a tree. At first she thought it was some kind of animal that had died there many years ago and they hadn't realised, but then she said the thing moved. So weird sightings actually come from their guests too, and not only them. Even all the way up to my grandpa. Apparently my grandpa first realised it was there when he was there during one Christmas. And apparently he was out playing with some of the other kids and he noticed a strange gown. He said this time it was red in colour, which was weird because usually it appears as black. At first he thought it was a tree, or at least the stump of a tree, of which was different colour to the rest of the woods, until he realised it was moving and he can see a face. The way that he describes it, now God bless him, he doesn't have much knowledge of Star Wars, but he said it looked like one of the characters with 4 lightsabers. I can't remember the specific name, but you know the one when it's got its hood up, but if it was red. From the sounds of that story, I was pretty creeped out by my grandpa, but then he says there was more. Apparently, there was another time that he was playing with his friends, and he actually saw multiple of this thing. Weirdly, apparently it also had glowing orange eyes. That's how he noticed there was more than one. He can't say for absolute certain because it was quite dark at this time, but he's pretty convinced it was, and they weren't isolated incidents. Now, I actually spent a lot of time out of there. I ended up spending quite a lot of time to just get away from my parents. At least that's what I think they were doing. My grandparents had a lot of time to look after me, so I was often there. My memory of my grandparents was absolutely loving. Like, I honestly couldn't have asked for better grandparents who were more loving or caring. It's something I don't think I really appreciated so much when I was young, actually, because they were kind of always there. So it's something that I kind of got a better appreciation for and grasp as when they weren't here, which I always regretted. But anyway, so I remember taking some walks there during the summertime when I was a bit younger. I've grown up with these stories pretty much all my life, so probably about 8 or 9 out of 10 times that I'd actually go out there, I was half expecting to have some kind of horrifying encounter. Though it never really happened, I actually went out there multiple times with an overactive imagination, really wishing that something would happen to me. The stupidest thing I ever did was I actually called for it a few times. Now, I don't know why I actually did this, but again, nothing would happen. I remembered one specific day though when I was out there seemed to be some kind of haze up ahead. It was almost like there was a big filter and there was some kind of fog which wasn't there before suddenly over part of the scenery. I do think to myself that this is particularly weird. It's something I haven't seen before and my young mind can't comprehend it. I had a really weird feeling too, and strangely there was some kind of static in the air which was making the fibres on my jumper stand up and also the hair on my arms and the hair on my head. I looked up scared there was going to be a lightning strike. I've been told about them before. This was before you had the videos to watch on the internet, but I was aware of it. I think maybe they told me in school about it one day, but I digress. I did look up and there was no rain clouds whatsoever. So I think this is specifically weird. It's almost like I'd walked into some kind of electrical storm, of which there was no storm, just the electrical aspects of it. So this was a deeply weird moment. I kind of felt uncomfortable. I've looked up the feeling later on in life and it's similar to what those experience when they're in the vicinity of infrasound. Just a deep unhappiness and feeling that something is off, where your mind and body can't comprehend what's happening. I remembered walking around for a while. I kind of wanted to see the Reaper thing. Every time I said the word Reaper, my grandpa would say, no, that's not it, no. But that's how I described it, and that's how it sounded. So yeah, I was looking for this thing constantly, but nothing would happen, so I headed back. I think this was really odd. I remembered when I got home, my grandparents asked what was wrong with my hair, and I said, I don't know, some kind of storm. They both looked at each other and my grandpa laughed. He knew there wasn't a storm. It was really nice and sunny outside. He thought I was just messing around or something, or had wore one of his hats and not said. He actually brought this up and I said, no, I'm serious. That's what it was. He then laughs and we go about our day. I constantly pester him though to learn more and more about the Reaper. He tells me not to call it that. He describes it as an entity, but I continue with my term. I say, how do you feel when it's there? What happens? He says, I don't know, you just kind of feel off, almost like you're being hunted, and you'll know when that thing is there. You feel like you're being watched. I've had it times where I could look up between two trees and there was something staring at me through them. As I locked eyes, my vision would go blurry and there it would be, that horrible skeleton looking thing. Apparently too, sometimes it would appear with more of a horse head, which actually sounded more scary to me. Whenever you actually got to where it was before, there was also a bad smell allegedly. The thing that I wasn't too scared about though is that apparently it never actually harmed anyone or anything. Well, at least that's what I thought. Apparently, they had a pet dog there before which everybody loved. It was a really nice Labrador and it would roam the land freely. However, one night the dog didn't come back and they start to panic a little bit. They think, oh god, what if this dog has actually gone into the river and drowned? Then one of the neighbours actually reported seeing something by it, and the description sounded like our dog or an animal very similar to it. So worried, we decide to head over and see what's wrong, my grandfather says. When they get there, they can only describe a scene out of a horror film. Apparently the dog was there, but it was entirely drained of blood, and there were some bite marks near its neck. I don't know what kind of creature could have possibly done that. I just knew that it was one that I did absolutely not want to encounter, now or at any point in the future. So what did you do, Grandpa? I buried it, very deep in the ground. He said weirdly though, no flowers seemed to grow around there, or plants, or anything, not even moss. I now feel a little more unsettled and I start to sweat a little bit as I'm uncomfortable in my chair. I actually felt quite stressed out by hearing that. I can see by the look in my grandpa's face that he wishes that he didn't tell me that and I was probably too young to hear it. He says, now son, listen to me. Don't be scared to go out of there. Haven't seen it for years. It could have been anything. I mean, that was kind of a back in my day thing. Now you're probably safe out there. Yeah, great, I thought. I could not stop thinking about this thing. The problem was too, like I said, this is back in the day when that you can only really research things through libraries or actually seeing them and experiencing things. But again, I'm not going to go to the library. And why not explore? For a couple of weeks I actually refused to go out through the forest, but eventually the curiosity and inquisitive part of me took over, so I head out once more. I'm going down a trail and walking down quite a steep incline. My grandpa was supposed to repair stairs here, but he hasn't. Well, kind of more like board decking, but it's quite annoying really. I eventually make it down and I get my white shoes very dirty. I'm just going to wash them off in the lake later on though, I think. Now, as I continue down doing my exploring, I'm pretty convinced nothing is going to happen when I see something odd. I can see a hand moving behind a tree. It's a very white hand too at that. It almost looked impossibly white. Then the clouds move behind the sun and I can see that it's kind of like a dark yellow colour. That's odd. It looks extremely skinny. I thought maybe it was some kind of animal. It kind of looked more like a chicken leg, I guess, than anything, but I didn't dare get closer to it as I saw one of the thumbs moving. I'm now not sure if what I was looking at was some kind of caterpillar or something similar to that, as I'd start to make my slow retreat to get away from it. I think it's weird. Just as this happens, that weird static starts to pick up in the air again and I can taste a metallic thing in my mouth. I don't know what it is, but I have a cold sweat now, and I quickly head back to my grandpa's. I decided not to say what had happened because I wasn't likely to be allowed out again if I said that I've gone off exploring on my own without telling anyone. My excuse for going out there was something much different, so I knew it wouldn't necessarily sit well if they'd found out what had actually happened. So now, I just go to bed. But I can't stop thinking of it. There was just something odd about it. I had no idea what I'd seen at that time, and that part of me was eating me up. So I decided to do another adventure. Now this is the following day. I go to the exact spot where the hand is, and while I'm walking there, I can't get the possibilities out of my head. I wish I had somebody else there with me to go exploring with, but I think my grandpa's going to be annoyed if I tell him. He was also doing some work on the cars now. He'd actually made me promise him before that I wouldn't go out there too far on my own, and I made a promise and I wasn't going to break that because it would upset him. I was being brave though. I was just hoping I wouldn't end up like the dog. Now I make it to the exact tree where I saw the hand, and weirdly, some of the ground below it seems to have died. It's almost like you've got all these perfectly healthy trees everywhere, but suddenly, on this specific one, just where the hand was, it seems like it's just dead, like loose bark, and also the ground doesn't have any plants which seem to be surviving. I do check a couple of times to make sure that this is actually the exact same tree, and it turns out that it is, which again is super weird for me. I'm not sure what to think of it. I decide to explore further and further. Now I do this for quite a long time, because eventually the sun starts to set, and I now realise that it's time for me to get back. That's when I noticed something strange that I didn't before. There's some kind of pile of sticks in the ground that wasn't there before. I initially thought it was my grandpa making some kind of bonfire or something, so I'm actually more confident and happy in this moment. I'm expecting to see him and to go and say hello to him, and to have a little explore around together. Well, I get closer and closer and I realise that something is quite odd actually. It seems like this little pile is not sticks, they're bones. Now I don't know where these bones could have possibly come from. I go to pick one up, but I'm froze there for a second. Something just felt odd, and I have that strange feeling coming over me again. Like something is odd, and something bad might be about to happen. Now it sounds very similar to what my grandpa described, with the feelings of everything, and I notice this is strange. The pile was probably about 2 feet tall, and I thought that was extremely weird. I then head back. I don't get too far back when I hear some kind of language spoke. I thought maybe it was somebody from a foreign place, but it sounds different. It's almost like very loud deep sounds in a quick succession which then stop, and some kind of growling type sound. I'm froze there trying to see where this is coming from, and I just cannot find it. Now, I decide to turn away from this. I don't want to scare myself. It's getting dark and I'm not far away from getting in trouble with my grandpa and my grandma and my parents, and I don't want to have to suffer the consequences of that. So I continue bounding along until I'm halfway back. I don't hear the sounds again, but I think this is rather odd. Then, as I'm halfway back, I see something from behind a tree, which I can't describe. Somebody steps out, who I'd have to describe as about 7 feet tall, wearing a very flowing gown. And I look up, and I can see dark holes where eyes are supposed to be, and I see the face of a skeleton, and something animated moving around with it. It's not moving normally. It's kind of dancing, zigzagging from side to side, almost like it's glitching for a second. I say, huh? I say grandpa, thinking that it's him somehow, but it isn't. I look around and everything seems so dark, and it sounds like a storm's about to pick up. I'm froze there for a while, as this thing seems to slowly edge towards me. It's very hard to tell what direction that it's actually going in, because it kind of moves backwards before it goes forward. I decide to walk further down. I'm actually closer to home this way to see if this thing's following me, and it seems to. I was honestly awestruck by this. I didn't immediately connect the dots of what I was seeing to what my grandpa had described before and other members of my family, but I moved down a bit further now. This thing was moving extremely slow. I mean, probably like quarter of my walking speed. For a good 5 or 10 minutes, I kept changing directions to see if this thing would stop following me, but it wasn't. It was getting closer and I didn't realize it at first, until I can see more and more detail. This thing looked just like the Reaper, just as I thought, and now the cards all fell on me at once. I scream and start running, and just like in your dreams, I seem to run extremely slow. I don't know why this was actually. I still don't to this day, but my legs were probably so scared that I couldn't run with any kind of pace whatsoever. So I'm left there trying desperately to get away from this thing, going slow as anything, and I seem to be not going much quicker myself. I heard snapping sounds now too. They're very loud, almost like gunshots, but it sounded like something was snapping in half constantly. I eventually make it back towards where my grandparents' house is. I was absolutely covered in sweat, and my grandma finds me and then says, "God, did you go swimming?" I say no, and I can't let out the words. I eventually get back in, and she punishes me and tells me off for going swimming in the lake. I get told to bath off quickly, and that I better explain to my grandpa why I was swimming out there. I'm stuck in the bath, literally shivering. It was a hot bath too. That's how scared I was. When I saw my grandpa, I actually didn't have the heart to tell him what I was doing and what I saw. It wasn't until months later that I could actually reveal what happened and why I wouldn't go out of the house and why I was so scared that night. He then looks at me and says, "I know what you saw, son, just please don't go out there again." And I agreed. I never did. Eventually I got older and completely forgot about the experience. That was until I had a bad dream which reminded me of it. I don't actually believe the Reaper's a real thing, but I don't know how else to describe what I saw that day. I want you guys to let me know what you think it could have been. I don't know if my incidents were isolated too, but I'm really having nightmares about it again and I want them to stop. I want to get closure to this. My father is a park ranger, and even when he was off duty, he still liked to take me on trips out into the great wilderness. We went to quite a few different national parks, but something that I'd like to share with you is a rather strange experience that we had while we went on one camping trip during the summer. Now, we were planning to be out here for about 4 days, and this is during the summer break. It meant that a lot of different places were very busy, but my father, having the career that he did, knew one that would be a very quiet place we could go to, and I was all up for it. At the time, I was doing okay in school, but I didn't really know what I wanted really. At the time, I was pretty sure I was going to end up in the military, but it didn't happen for a few reasons. But because of this at the time, my dad thought it would be a good idea to take me out into the woods just to get accustomed to being outside. It made a lot of sense, and obviously you're going to spend time camping out if you're in the military, so it was a pretty good idea, we thought. I did have some summer school things that I needed to do which were coming up, and I really didn't want to do them. I don't know, the idea of summer school just never really made sense to me. The way that I'd look at it is that you're on summer vacation for a reason, and you shouldn't have to do more things in between. I think it should be a time that you can really rest and recover, but my mum didn't think so. Again, I think my dad understood this, and that's why he was quite willing to take me on a nice trip I could enjoy. There's a number of different things we had planned for this particular trip. Now, on the first day we set out just for a nice hike to see the views. We had all of our camping gear with us in some old military rucksack things, my dad carrying the most. Now, during the first day, we saw a couple of people around, but I realised that the further we went, the less and less they would become. Now, this is a good thing for me because I kind of wanted to escape people a bit. It was a really good experience, and I had a good time bonding with my father over this. Now, eventually it gets closer to nightfall, and we decide that we're going to try some night fishing. It's something that I haven't done before, so I'm quite excited to do so. We eventually make it to the campground that my dad had picked out for us, so I'm pretty happy to be there and put the stuff down. My dad shows me where we can do the fishing and sets up everything and gives me a headlamp. Now, while this is happening, I haven't really done fishing before, so I'm pretty much at a loss as to how exactly I'm supposed to do this. So every 5 minutes that I haven't caught anything, I put my headlamp closer to the water looking for the fish, obviously scaring them off, and I constantly move my fishing reel around thinking that's going to make a difference, but again, it probably just scares them off. I don't know. I was more worried about hurting my hand on the fishing reel. My dad seems to be gone for quite a while though, but it doesn't really bother me at the time because I'm too caught up in trying to do the fishing. While fishing, I can hear some water disturbance. It's not close, but I definitely notice it, and I face my head up, trying to shine my lamp towards it, but obviously I can't see that far. The torch isn't that powerful. Now, I can just about make out the silhouette of something in the water before it disappears down again, and I think, wow, that must have been a really big fish. Now, something strange that happened while doing so is, out of my peripheral vision, I realised that a plant has just moved, like somebody's gone over and touched it. Now again, there's no one around but myself and my dad, and I know it's not my dad, so I'm a little bit unsettled by this. Now, I do think maybe it was just some kind of animal, so I don't think too much of it. I try and cast my fishing reel as far out as I can now. I just about do so, and my dad eventually arrives and says, "Godson, you nearly took me out with that. You have to be careful," and shows me how to do it properly. And my dad's actually doing fishing properly. We didn't eventually find anything, but he tells me not to shine the light down because it scares the fish and that you kind of want to stay still. I tell him that I'm sure there was a large fish that disturbed the waters further up, but he tells me the fish shouldn't be big enough to really do that, because I said it was similar to a person, but I think my dad dismisses this. Now it starts to get quite cold, so we head back to our campsite and settle in for the night. and it's a pretty good night. My dad was reading a book and I wasn't really sure what to do with myself, so I just started drawing some things. It's something I'd done when I was a lot younger. I don't actually do drawing anymore, but I'm pretty good at kind of like the cartoon sketches for some reason. I guess I used to draw The Simpsons and SpongeBob or something like that, but I think that's the reason that I have kind of a knack for it. And my dad was pretty impressed with my drawings. I just drew some of the forest and tried to draw the thing that I'd seen in the water earlier. Well, not necessarily the thing, but the way the water was disturbed and the plant moving. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. And that was that. We eventually fall asleep and wake up for the next day. Now on the second day, we weren't actually leaving this spot, and we were just going to do some more hiking around. My dad took me to one place, and my god did it have a beautiful view there. Everything looked so pristine and beautiful, and at the time it cemented into my mind that I wanted to be a military person, because I thought, well, I'm just going to be seeing things like this all the time, and for that I was incredibly excited. Now my grandfather and his grandfather are in the military. We're kind of from a military family, so I thought it was going to be good to follow suit. Now, eventually this day comes to a close and nothing too much happened. The following morning we pack up and we're ready to go on to the last part of this, get into the last campsite, the third one. Now the hiking to get to this one wasn't too bad really. And again, I was pretty pleased to go out there. I don't know why, I just felt good the whole time, and it was a lovely experience. Now we get to the campground eventually and settle in for the night. And this is when things get a bit weird. I'm awoken by the sight of somebody outside the tent. I can just about see the silhouette. I say, "Dad," and then realise he's not there, and I quickly unzip the tent. I can see my dad holding the hunting knife and torch in the other, pointing at someone. I say, "Dad, Dad," and he says, "To stay still, son," and my dad screams at somebody to get back now. Because of how bright it is, and obviously I've just come out of the dark tent, my eyes haven't adjusted, but I quickly go and grab my headlamp and turn that on, and I can see somebody covered in blood there holding a knife, just staring at me and my dad. Now, what was really crazy is what happened next. He turns round, throws himself into a tree, then gets up again, and repeats the process. He stares at us for probably 10 seconds before going up to the exact same tree near our campsite, throwing himself at it, then coming back again. I realise that he's dropped a knife and constantly picks it up, and he hasn't cut himself, and the blood and stuff is just from the tree. But what on earth is he doing? Now this gone on for a good 10 minutes before my dad tells me to start packing up everything. I quickly do so, and I didn't feel too scared in this moment because having my dad there with his knife made me feel like the safest person in the world. Now we eventually get all of our stuff together, and I kid you not, the whole time this guy was constantly doing this same thing over and over again. I've never seen anything like it, and not even to this day I haven't. We eventually get our stuff together, and my dad tells me to hold his hand and to lead the way back. Now this is a big responsibility at the time because I haven't really been camping like this before, and I'm not certain I know the way back, but my dad tells me that he's not going to look back until this guy's out of sight. Now I do constantly glance back, and my dad tells me not to because he can see when I'm doing it because of the light, and he knows how scared I can get sometimes. But I asked my dad what's happening, and he said that the guy's constantly doing this same thing over and over again, until eventually we're at a point where my dad can take over and tells me to do the same. My dad's walking incredibly quick, and eventually we make it back. My dad quickly makes a call to the police and reports what's happening. I'm confused as heck, and eventually we get back into the car and drive home. Now it turns out that what happened, and this is something I only learnt after my dad told me after a number of years, is that the police found that guy there. Apparently, he had stabbed somebody and then taken some kind of mushroom that gives you a repetitive motion syndrome or whatever it's called. and that's why he was throwing himself at the tree. Apparently he was completely out of his mind, but they managed to capture him. Now, if it wasn't for that mushroom making him repeat his motions, he could have easily continued to progress towards us and probably just stabbed us in our tent. But thank God he didn't. I'd like to give you a little bit of context before that I get on with my part of the story. Now, this was a really weird time in my life. I was in my mid-20s and everything was going really well. I mean, my career was going excellently. It took me a long while to get into this position, but I was really happy for it. And I don't know, everything just seemed like it couldn't get much better. I'd married someone that I was really happy to be with, and interestingly, my family members didn't actually all know about this. It was basically a secret wedding we had, and we were going to have another one up in the future as a more formal one, but we couldn't end up getting that far. Basically, one day when I was at my parents' house with my wife, she just turns to me when my parents have gone away and said, "Oh, by the way, I don't think we can stay married together. Since I've married you, it's really felt as though that my life has changed for the worse, and that I've become almost that stereotypical wife. And all saving for a house, I never wanted to do that, even though it's a thing she'd agreed to do with me, which I thought was really odd." Now, she also said that, "Oh, by the way, we've also got to change where we live too," which is something that really surprised me. Because, of course, the marriage thing was pretty hard to deal with, but living away too, that was going to be even harder. I knew for a fact that I absolutely did not want to go back to my parents, because where they live, it's basically miles away from everything. And one of the nicest things that happened to me was moving out with her and just getting away from everything. But now I was faced with living with strangers, which is something I'm not really that keen on. And also losing my wife and becoming alone once again. Ah yes, my old friend loneliness. Well, I say that kind of retrospectively because it's not, but you'll find out more about that later, so yeah. Anyway, I was also about to start a new job, and literally I was only 2 days past renewing the rent contract with my wife for another year. So yeah, you can imagine how much it sucked. And the job that I was about to go into was not an easy one at all. It's not your typical job, it's quite a high pressured one. But it's something I'd been excited about for months, so I'd gone from basically counting down the days to instead feeling pretty confused about everything. It was my last day at work not too long ago, and I don't know, it just kind of felt like a surreal moment. Just everyone was coming up and hugging me, it was great, and instead of it being a beautiful moment, it turned out to be quite the opposite. It was a pretty weird feeling for me. I mean, I don't really know how to describe it, but yeah, that's that. And now at the moment, I live with my wife, and she goes out every so often and does whatever. But there's another part of this too I forgot to mention. She went for a trip away one day, and I questioned if she'd actually gone alone, and she said, "Oh yeah, I have," but in truthfulness, she hadn't. Turned out I checked her phone, and she had cheated on me and been meeting up with some other guy. The worst thing was, this was a guy that I met once. Yeah, my situation sucked, and I wasn't happy, that's all I can say. So now, basically, I don't really know what to do. I'm going around seeing the odd friends here and there, but the problem is, very few of them actually understand me, and I can feel more alone being around people that don't have any empathy for my situation. Not in the sense that they have to care, but I don't like it when they just can't understand and they just immediately start talking about themselves and their own things, kind of oblivious to what's going on or what's right for me. Also, there's a few others I know too where they won't actually care about me, they'll just try and get me to do the things that they want to do because, they don't want to do it alone. But it kind of leaves you in this weird limbo land, I guess is what you'd call it. You're doing everything right, but it feels like nothing's going right around you. And there's some other things too that are kind of ticking you off. I mean, it's important not to give in to temptations and to stay on the straight and narrow, but my god, does that become difficult sometimes. So that was my predicament which I was in. and I wanted to kind of get away from people. Where I live is in a major city and there's always too many people around. I always have my habit of doing my night walks with my music, but the problem is there's constantly too many people around and I just can't get left alone, it feels like. Even if I'm talking to one of my friends on the phone, there will always be somebody who seems to come up to me asking for directions or something. Completely arrogant to the fact that I'm talking to others, so yes, that leaves me with the escape plan. So, I want to get back into nature and just get back to where I guess people can't hurt me. Nothing can hurt me really, but I'm being a bit melodramatic here, but you kind of get the point. There is a week of thoughts and feelings of which are really trying to take over now, but I'm not letting them. I've been down and you can't take me there again, that's my mindset. So I set off on one particular day when I booked the day off work. I actually had the day off planned already to enjoy it. I did think I was going to enjoy it with my wife, or should I say ex-wife, but hey, here I was. So I start walking into the forest at around midday. Things are pretty okay. I'm just basically lost in my thoughts but trying not to be. I usually distract myself with music and whatnot, but this time I decided that I don't really think I should be doing that. I could probably spend my time better just trying to stay in my head and actually retrain my thoughts. Because of course my thoughts are quite negative at the minute and I don't want to fall victim to that. So I decided to go without music or anything. Another thing that I probably should have done is brought more water, but I didn't really think of this at the time. I probably filed for divorce about 4 days ago and yeah, it was a really weird feeling. The thing I didn't like is the fact that I knew I'm pretty much stuck with this person that I can't stand for at least the next month for the time that I'm getting settled into my new job. And every time I see her, it just reminds me of all the things that I didn't like of which happened. And I'm trying my best to remain civil. I'm trying my best to turn off the savage, the voice that bubbles up in my head every so often, but it was really difficult. And I was kind of failing, I don't know, it's a weird loss feeling. I control my breathing though every so often and I find that this really helps and makes a big difference for me. I'm one of those people where I can make myself win, or I can also make myself lose in my head if I'm not being too careful, so I decided to choose the winner's path. Now, I'm very glad to say that there was nobody around at this particular time. Now, I was trying to take my mind off other things too, like work commitments and other projects I needed to complete before starting the job. I mean, yeah, I could book 4 days off, including the weekend, and not really be able to enjoy it because of work commitments. I was supposed to get a raise soon, but I knew it was going to be difficult for it to come through, but I suppose everybody has those problems, don't they? I remembered when walking I kind of felt a bit fearless, which is something I haven't experienced for a few years. This one, however, was quite pleasant and it actually come from supreme confidence. I've become an extremely confident person in the last few years and that always serves me well. It's really weird though, it's almost like I've got most of the jigsaw complete but not all of it. There always seems to be a piece missing for which I'm trying to put in there but I never seem to be able to. I seem to be the great philosopher who can see what other people need to do, whereas I'm almost a stranger for myself in terms of advice or at least listening to it. A lot of what I say seems to fall onto deaf ears when I'm talking to myself, and I feel like if my walls can hear me talk, they would tell me just shut up and be quiet. But anyway, I get further and further into my walk and I do feel very sweaty. I'm somebody who does tend to sweat quite a lot. I mean, even at the best of times in winter, I have to be careful about even wearing coats which are too heavy, because very quickly I can start to sweat and just feel horrible. I do have a new special deodorant I can use, but it doesn't really work, but the sweat was bothering me. Not just because of the fact I might smell, but I knew that I'd probably sweat through the deodorant which I was wearing, so obviously it's going to be quite annoying if I still had a lot further to go and I started to sweat. No issues, I just threw my shirt off temporarily. Now as I do this, it does become apparent how many bugs and insects are around, but they never seem to bite me really. Well, at least I think that until I can't stop scratching above my neck. It was a really weird feeling. It was almost like somebody had put something on me, but I couldn't quite take it off. I'm not too worried and just keep going. I'm trying not to wipe the sweat off because I know it helps cool you down. I go further and further into the forest now, and I feel quite comfortable. This is actually in an area that I'm not too familiar with, and I suppose that it served me well. It's around springtime, and lots of the greenery has returned to the trees and the surrounding nature. There's lots of moss and other things on the trees around me. It looks really cool. I can smell more and more of the plants and wildlife, and it starts to make me feel more comfortable and almost at peace and like I'm at home kind of. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is all I needed to get the clarity in my head. I just had to go for a nice walk and get away from everything. Every so often thoughts of my ex creep into my mind because we used to do little treks like this sometimes, and I'm trying my very best not to let it bother me because it can do so easily. Every time that I have a thought of her, I let it creep again to the back of my mind, almost like a breath in and out, or waves in the ocean. Now, as I'm walking, I do have a feeling that somebody else is here and with me. I'm not a spiritual person, but I do kind of believe that everybody has like a guardian angel. I've actually seen a psychic who told me that it was my great grandma, and I do believe she is with me, and that's what I think in this particular moment. Of course, I'm not delusional. I don't expect them to fend off every evil in the world, but I do kind of like the idea of her being here looking after me, so I just presume that she's with me. Every so often I can smell a smell of perfume, and it's pretty cool. This is something that's happened before. My dad apparently is more sensitive to things like this, and I keep on smelling a nice perfume smell, and I say hey and her name and I smile to myself. I don't know why, I just knew that in this particular moment that she was with me and that everything was going to be okay. Or at least that's what I keep telling myself. I now progress into a part of the forest which has kind of denser plants on the ground. The trees are always high and hard to see around, but these plants in particular seem to really be obstructing my view. I think this is okay though, and just keep pressing on further. I'm cautious not to go too far because I don't have any water with myself and I don't want to be out here alone. I just got a new mobile phone too, and I've had issues where that it doesn't always get signal. Also, some of my accounts seem to go public, which I'd set private for a while, then logging in again, and I just didn't like the feeling, almost like my privacy was breached. Around a corner, and I'm taking on some slight elevation, but it's not enough to cause any issues. I decided to stop for a little while, and I have to do up my shoelaces. One of my shoes is annoying me because it's kind of cutting into my ankle a bit. I tried to undo the shoelaces a few times, but it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. I'm kind of wearing them like, you know how people wear really expensive shoes with all the laces undone, but it doesn't seem to be making a difference. I decide that each step forward I'm going to try and block out the pain, but my god, that was difficult to do. Weirdly though, every time I look at my actual ankle it seems to be in good health and as though nothing's wrong with it. Now, I continue on this walk. The perfume smells left me, and I turn around for a second and see what appears to be a hiker. They seem to be just off in the distance. They're wearing some black overalls or something, and they just go behind a tree. I don't really think much of it and just think, well, I've got to pick up the pace to get away from these people now. I remembered too that I really miss seeing my brother at this point. He was aware of everything which was happening and we made a few calls, but I really wanted to see him and meet up and do things with him, but he wasn't available, and that was kind of hard to deal with. It's almost like having a best friend that lives out of state where you see each other occasionally, but the days that you really need someone there at least with you, they're not able to, but I guess that's fine. I suppose that's how life goes. I remembered stopping for a moment because I noticed that my shoelaces were dragging a bit, and that's when I realised they weren't. It was someone coming from behind. I look around for a few seconds and said, hey. I don't get a reply, so I just presume that whoever this is being extremely rude to me, so I think, well, I'm just going to press on instead. I do feel a little bit uncomfortable now for the first time. I mean, I'm not a small person. I'm over 6 feet slightly. Not really that built, but quite strong, and I know some martial arts, so yeah, I'm not too bothered. I am worried though, because I don't really know where I'm going, and I don't want to get too lost out here. The last couple of weeks, when things have went wrong, I found that I'm not my usual calm, confident self. My mind kind of goes into a panic more easily, and I don't know, maybe that's just from not sleeping so well, or maybe it's a host of other things, but it's a really weird feeling. So a little bit panicked, I just pick up the pace, and my shirt's been on for a while now. I've still got a jumper which is wrapped around me, and to be honest, all it served to do is act like a radiator, so I'm walking quickly away, but I also feel like I'm far too hot at the same time, which is quite a funny feeling really. I then realised stupidly that I still have my bottle of water in my jumper pocket. I can't believe I didn't realise it was here. I slam that thing within seconds and throw the bottle off somewhere. Now, the weird thing is, when I threw the bottle, I don't actually hear it hit the ground. Yeah, it was a plastic one, but it still had a tiny bit of water left, so it should have had some weight or something. I have a weird habit of not downing all of the water completely for some reason. I know it's stupid. But yeah, I don't hear the bottle whatsoever, and I'm a little put off by this. That's when I hear it. It's kind of like a laughing sound. Now, I've heard foxes before and other animals, and it kind of sounds just like those. I thought, God, if I didn't know what this was, I'd actually be quite scared at the minute. I am becoming a little bit paranoid. I kind of feel like I've done something wrong, and that I shouldn't be out here like this, but I don't know, it's almost like something took over me. I end up going up a bit further, and eventually I find some ledges to sit on, and I'm just staring off at the trees now. I kind of forget about my situation and relax a little bit, and I remember looking at the light coming through the leaves and thinking, well, I suppose life is kind of beautiful, and it just depends how that you actually look at everything. I thought, I sure wish I had someone here to enjoy this with, and my mind starts to drift backwards again, which is quite annoying. I'm now thinking once again of the things that have gone wrong recently, and it's kind of stabbing at me quite a lot. So I keep going and pick myself up again. My eyes seem to be more fixated up this time, and I am a little bit worried about whatever the sound was behind me, but it soon stops. Now I get a little bit further down the trail when I hear something that I can't really explain. I hear somebody call out, which almost sounds exactly like my name in a male voice. I think this is really weird, and I decide that I must keep going. But I can't figure out where they are, or who it actually is. I half think that I've run into somebody that I knew, but I knew realistically that was really unlikely, especially because of the time of day of which this occurred, so I think this is odd. And that's when I see it. There's a person who looks like they've got to certainly be homeless not too far away, wearing all black, kind of looking at me saying, hey, stop, hey. This person was actually quite tall, and I don't know, they had a really weird look in their eyes. It almost looked like their eyes are far too pale. I can't tell when their clothes are from, but it doesn't look like it's in the last couple of years. I say, no, sorry, I've got to go, and I just turn and start walking quickly. Almost military, I keep repeating to myself, watch your six, as I'm walking away from who or whatever this person is. I'm looking over my shoulder every so often, but I'm trying to do that confident walk. You know, the ones that you're kind of taught to do. Well, not really formally taught, but you know you have to look confident to not look like a victim. Yeah, I was doing one of those. I was in such a weird headspace though that I was kind of happy about everything that was happening around me. Not in the sense of this situation, but I wasn't put off by the situation. I've been in some rough situations here and there, but this one felt a little bit different. Maybe it's because of last week's events, but I wasn't worried about what happened, what didn't happen. I didn't even feel like fighting if it come to it. I don't know, I just felt weird. I look around and I can't see the person, but I can hear some movement on one side of the trees. It kind of sets in a bit now that I'm in a situation I don't want to be, and I guess panic took over, and I feel my heart beat quicker and quicker. Now, it's at a point where that I'm still walking normally, but it almost feels like there's another force inside my body. I keep telling myself, stay calm and watch your six, and every so often I look behind myself, but the person isn't there. This gone on for probably another 20 minutes until eventually I stop to catch my breath. Now, I can continue going on further, but I realise that it's probably going to become dark, and I 100% don't want to be stuck out here with whatever this is. Now, kind of tapping into my bad situation, I become a bit fearless and just turn right around. I kind of march forward a bit like a train. I don't actually know why I did this. Again, I think it was just frustration of my situation and not really being bothered with what was going on anymore. I think, God, if this is really my time, then so be it. I can't be bothered now. And I just start marching forward. I do this for about, let's say 2 or 3 minutes until my adrenaline settles down a bit and I start to feel more tired. I kind of had the feeling like when you run in a dream, but not exactly. I've always had some injury on my leg and it's really annoying. Or not always, probably in the last 5 years, but pretty much whenever I do certain kinds of exercise, my leg can really ache for ages afterwards, and I was a bit frustrated because the feeling comes back. I thought, well, I can probably make it out of here, but I'm probably going to get injured in the process, and again I get more annoyed. I can then hear movement again, and I now realise that the person isn't far away. Initially I stop to listen to where they are, and I hear them swear. Then I hear another voice swearing too, not far off. I don't know exactly what they were saying, but I was thoroughly creeped out at this point, and I know that I need to move. Now this really scares me. I don't know why, it was just something about knowing that there's more than one of these people that unsettled me. I then say, what do you want from me? One of them says, you're going to give us everything. I don't know what that means, and I say I don't have any money. They say it doesn't matter, and I just scream, I don't have my card, I don't have anything to give you. I was half tempted to tell them about what was actually going on in my situation, but I decide that the best thing that I can do is just keep going. For some reason, I didn't let up and sprint now. I used to actually be really good at running, especially long distances, but since going to the gym, I've actually got quite good at sprinting too. I got it from the sports that I used to play, but for whatever reason, I just didn't want to do it. Again, I think I was probably far too lost in all of the rubbish from within the week, but I don't sprint. I also stupidly don't look around. I'm just confidently walking away, almost like I'm in control of the situation, but obviously I'm not. That's when I feel it. Something grabs onto the back of my jumper. Within a split second, I've turned around, punched something. Turns out that I've missed what I'm trying to punch for, but whatever was holding me let go. I then pick up a full sprint within a few seconds and start screaming out some profanities. There's one particular swear word that I always say really loud, and I suppose that because I've done it so often, I've probably trained my vocal cords in it, and I do it in this situation. I ended up sprinting. I'm not sure how long that I was sprinting for, and I don't bother looking back. I keep grabbing little branches and things that are loose and throwing them behind me, hoping to deter whatever's chasing me from doing it. I'm a little bit worried though, because I think, well, a male of my size, again, I'm not saying that I'm massive, but I'm not really small, shouldn't be in a situation like this unless that these people have really bad intentions. I've already told them that I don't have any money or anything to give them, so why are they still pursuing me like dogs? Now, I probably jogged and sprinted together for about another 5 minutes before I get really angry. I turn on the spot and scream a swear word once more and say, come on then, like I'm ready for them. I don't hear anything now, just silence, and for whatever reason, that was the worst part of the whole situation. It now dawns on me that I'm lost out here, and I have no idea where the people are pursuing me. So yeah, I just turn around and I almost accept everything. Weirdly, parts of my life start flashing through my mind, the good and the bad, and in that moment I felt lots of pride for myself for everything that I'd overcome. I start walking now and pick up the pace. Now, I know for a fact that a branch didn't snag onto me because when I've looked on my jumper, I can see that there's no holes or anything, so it's definitely a person that grabbed me. I lift up my shirt and to my surprise I can actually see a bruise where who or whatever it was had tried to grab on me so hard that it's actually bruised a bit. Now, I ended up power walking for probably another good 10 minutes before I eventually come to roughly where the start of the trail is. Now, I take one last minute to turn around and I scream again and I say come on, swearing. I think an animalistic part of my brain had finally kicked into life, and maybe it was really the fight or flight and the latter come to light. But I did feel scared though a few seconds after that. I eventually make my way a bit further up and I'm able to escape from that forest. It was such a messed up situation. I go to check my phone and of course there's no internet. I think, well, that just sums it up, doesn't it? But then I feel a sense of relief knowing that I'm out of the situation and that I don't have to worry about my phone not having internet when I'm stuck out of there. It was starting to get cold now too, which was actually really annoying. It's actually become so cold that I have to start jogging the rest of the way home, which again was so annoying for me. I could tell that my body was exhausted and I was also trying to gain weight at this time, so I knew I could say goodbye to any weight that I could have gained. Yeah, that's how I was thinking. Nothing was really coming across logically. I did think about reporting this and everything, but the more I thought of it all, I kind of realised that they were probably just homeless people, and that it probably wasn't as bad as it seemed, but I don't know. When I got home, I was faced with my partner again, and I couldn't be bothered to actually talk to her. I kind of explained briefly what had happened, but she just didn't seem to understand. I decided that I should just save the details for myself, and that she kind of didn't deserve to know almost. Now, it wasn't that long ago that this situation happened to me, and I haven't really told anyone about it, to be honest, other than you guys, but I don't know. Let me know what you think it could have been, because to be honest, I really don't know. I love to tell myself that it was probably just homeless people trying to rob me, but the thing is, I have contactless on my phone. I don't carry a bank card. I don't see the point, it's just another thing for me to lose. But I wonder what would have happened if they weren't happy with just taking my phone. Why were they out there? And why were they so quick to get aggressive and try and grab me? Yeah, it was pretty weird. I mean, I like to think that there was nothing too bad from it, but I guess there kind of was. And it does actually worry me a bit that I was so lost up in my head that I didn't consider the situation for which I put myself in, so yeah, I guess if it's kind of like a learning point for other people, just please try and always be aware of your surroundings and the situations which you're entering, because I know when you're emotionally reacting to things, it's easy to lose sight of what's in front of you, but sometimes that can be the most important thing for a variety of reasons. I was doing trick-or-treating one night with my older brother. I felt pretty safe doing so. I was about 11 and he was about 13. To be honest, we weren't exactly at the best age to go out on our own, but our neighbourhood was relatively safe, and my parents didn't have an issue with us doing so. All is well, basically. I was dressed up as a vampire, and my brother, I don't know what he was maybe a zombie, Frankenstein, vampires, and just anything you can think of mixed together. I really wanted to get one of those scream masks. You know, the cool ones where you can pump blood in it? Well, one of my friends had one, and I was jealous, but apparently the blood would always leak everywhere. So that was annoying. Now I start off and eventually fill up my bucket pretty nicely. I remembered one funny thing happened where an older lady said, "Oh, have you not got much there?" I'm on my second bucket. I didn't explain it well and she gave me a ton of things. I then explained the situation and she already closed the door. I still laugh about it today. So, we're just about to round up for the night and go and eat our stash. Everything's good. We turn back and turn around. Now, after not too long, we notice some people dressed up further ahead with some kind of campfire. Now, being young and probably naive, we just think they're other trick-or-treaters, and we're pretty interested in what they're doing. I said to my brother, "I don't know, it could be bad," but he said, "No, what if they're roasting marshmallows? We've got to go and join them." So that's what we do. We decide to go up there. I say that we don't have that many marshmallows, and then my brother reveals that he actually has some, which is really good. He had those giant ones, which I actually love to this day. So we start heading over there and realise that they're quite a long way from here. We also can't hear anything too, which was interesting. They're actually quite far off into the woods. Now, my father actually worked as a police officer and he'd given us a lot of information about stranger danger, but at the time we were not thinking of this at all. We just want to get out there. As we're making our way over there, we're dropping candy left, right and centre on the floor. I shouldn't have done it, but I guess we were too young to care. Now we probably walked about half a mile when we hear something. A very loud metal sound. It sounded like somebody dropped a big iron hammer on the ground. Weirdly, it sounded like the sound come from very close to us, which is weird. My brother then grabs my hand and says, "Quick, hide," and we hide behind a tree. What was more weird is that everybody by the campfire stops and they look in our direction. We think this isn't a good situation, but what was the sound? We're kind of naive, but we know that we're in danger now, so decide to stay put and not move at all. This goes on for probably about 20 seconds or so before my brother realizes something. He says, "Hey Brian, look." I say, "What?" They're coming here. They're coming towards us. Now, even though they're about 400 meters away, we were too afraid to move. I say, "What's happening? What can you see?" He says, "Shush, be quiet." And I do so. Now, it's probably the most quiet that I've ever been in my entire life during these few seconds. I can see them approaching slowly in the distance, and I don't know why they're coming here, but I feel really anxious. My palms begin to sweat and I kind of get shaky. Now weirdly, there was no sound to accompany them, so you didn't really know how close they were. They start moving through the tree line until eventually I can see something. There's one dressed in white robes, then two, then three, and they're carrying something on a stick. They're also leaking water or something on the ground, and there's two more holding the other end of it. Someone's also throwing things on the ground as they walk. I really felt like my heart had stopped while I realised that they're walking straight past me and continue on up ahead. I continue shaking now, and I become incredibly nervous. I felt like I didn't breathe too, and we slowly watch as they round a corner, and there's a disgusting smell to accompany them. After about 20 minutes, we finally decide that it's safe for us to get up, and we're all very nervous. Now, it doesn't take too long before my brother decides that we've got to get a move on here, and we start to proceed up the hill. It looks like blood on the floor and a blood trail. We actually follow this on the same path getting back until eventually it disappears into the tree line. Even writing this story, I'm starting to get the shakes again. I don't know who they were or what they were doing. I'm just thankful that we didn't have to find out.